not going to be a thick mathematical discussion. It's going to be kind of a thin conceptual discussion. Just raising some things, this menu for choice for you that you might want to know about. And then we're going to spend some time doing some more hands-on, as I discussed with you already. And then we'll adjourn. If you have questions and answer about your questions about this or about other stuff that you might want to get into, I'm happy to stick around afterward. I think I have a meeting at 5:15, and then I'll be free until we go out to dinner. Fiona, what time is that?
7 o'clock.
So we'll meet at 7.
Well, no, I think it's a really short walk, so maybe if we just all meet there for 7, but it will take 5 to 10 minutes, not even that.
Okay, so I'm free till 6:50. I might want to take 5 minutes in there at some point to clear my head. Although we've had such fun at dinner that anything in my head is usually gone by the time dinner's over. It's really a great group, and I really enjoy meeting the ones that I've seeing all of you and interacting with the ones I've interacted with. And don't hesitate to contact me. I'm very easy to find online. Easy to find here, but when I'm gone, it's easy to find online. I'm notoriously responsive, as quick as possible. Although occasionally I have to triage, as you all do. Okay. So where did we wrap up last time? We left it off free chocolate. There we are. It's pretty good stuff too. Okay, here we are. We were talking about these time invariant changing variables. That's where we wrapped up. Looks like maybe not a surefire solution. I suspect some of you are familiar with this because even maybe associations with people who went to P&T Pro, who are very, very good. And these are two, really, as you know, well-known and very, very good scholars. So what they do, should not be taken lightly. But there is this issue of political analysis which addresses the technique and raises some serious questions. And I'm not going to take a side on it, but I'm going to tell you to just be aware of that. It doesn't look like the magic bullet, at least in all circumstances. Okay, what other issues are left on the table? One of which is something that you were already introduced to a good amount on Monday afternoon, and yesterday morning as well. And that is heterogeneity. We've already discussed the fully constrained time series cross-section model, right? And assumes no heterogeneity. We've already been talking about this. And here you have an intercept. If you notice, it's subscripted t, right? We have a parameter on our y I t minus 1, which has no subscript, right? We can have an intercept. I'm sorry. We could have an intercept. We could have an intercept there that has no. The intercept could have nothing at all. It could just be an intercept that is does not subscript I or t. So just think of it as not having a t. We could have an intercept. Sorry, we could have a coefficient for y I t minus 1, which has no subscript for I or subscript for t. We have a beta here, which has no subscript for I or subscript for t. Okay? And we do not have any parameter relating y sub t to previous values of e, right? So we don't have, and even to the extent we would, we do have it here implicitly. We don't have any sub i's on those coefficients. Okay? So basically, intercepts are the same, coefficients are the same, dynamics are the same, lag structure is the same, right? Remember, you can have different lag structure. That's not something I've introduced yet. One possibility, what if the lag structure is different for different? Not only are dynamics different in the sense that you find maybe different autocorrelation coefficient. What if you find that some units are more responsive to x and t, others are more responsive to xt minus 1?
Go and get drunk. I would go and get drunk if I found that.
Well, wait until we're done before you start making these suggestions. That's not something you can start scanning in the process. I was going to say that in about 45 minutes, actually. I can't advocate that. Okay. You made really good comments until that point, Mark.
Well, maybe I should spell it out since you're making a big thing.
It's not a big thing.
If you have a different lag structure in one country than another, what in God's name are you going to make? I mean, are human beings different in France than in Germany? Well, yes, obviously, to some extent they are. You know, and of course, I'm in a different position than you. I have made my career on
Homogeneity.
on making the point that people are people wherever we find them. What's different is the circumstances in which they find themselves. Now, I find it impossible to conceive, but you could make a reputation doing so, of a situation in which humans behave differently in the sense that they are affected differently by the past. Oh my God, that's why I would go and get drunk. Because if that were to turn out to be true, hey, I've been wasting my time for 4 years.
Well, the question is, where do you draw the line, right? I mean, you will say, well, these intercepts differ, so we need to take that into account. And, well, maybe the coefficients differ too. So
No, absolutely. Those are fair enough.
Okay, well, but once we start getting into the land, once you start moving to coefficients, now you're saying, well, why can't the, you know,
The coefficients could be different too. I'm balking at the idea that the lag structures.
okay, well, the coefficients, if they differ enough, then they're almost going to apply a different lag structure.
Well,
Some could be 0 on the current effect, and some could be 1 on the current effect, right? And some could be 1 on the current effect and 0 on the other. So the point is, there's all kinds of possibilities here, right? That the fact is, one of the reasons why, I mean, I'm a big believer in what Mark defines, and I'm actually while my priors are not the perfect homogeneity in the world, I don't see a whole lot of value in replicating all the infinite variety that exists in people. Everything matters, right? Everything matters, everybody's different. That's not very interesting science, right? If you walk in, I'm giving a talk today to tell you how everything matters, right? That's not very interesting, right? People want to know, okay, don't some of these things matter more than others, right? And, and how? And can you give us 80% or 90% of the story instead of the full 100% or 99% of the story, right? Which requires a very completely different, you can spend the rest of your life, you spend today giving you 90% of the story, the rest of your life giving the other 10% and failing. And that's one of the problems with heterogeneity. When you start moving down the road of heterogeneity, you can just replicate unique events, right? Uniqueness in people and not the commonality. What makes science interesting, right, is the degree to which you could identify commonality, possibly conditionality, but if it's conditional on everything, then it's not very interesting, right? Although it might prove useful. Right? Maybe we'll get our medical science to the point where we'll have a complete model where we can plug in your characteristics and know precisely what to prescribe you to solve your particular problem. Right? That's a long way off, right?
even in medical science.
Well, medical science is far behind political science, I think, at this point. Still, they get a little bit of money to do the research that we do, but I don't think they made as much use of this. It's also part of the world a little more. Biology is maybe a little bit more complicated. Okay, so anyway, we do sort of say it's okay to look at some heterogeneity, right? We're interested in, we're interested in especially the heterogeneity of the intercepts, and particularly those cross-sectional unit intercepts, right? We're particularly interested in those. The interesting thing about that is that may be the least important element of the heterogeneity. Dealing with some of the other elements, unfortunately, can be really complicated. And most importantly are the dynamics. That's really, really tricky stuff. And disentangling differences in lag structure can be too. So thankfully, you don't have to do it on the basis of priors, right? And to some extent, you can just do it on the basis that it's really hard to do. And not just hard like it's hard work. It's just really hard that it's just really hard to differentiate. Right? It's just hard to disentangle, it's hard to differentiate. So even if you go spend all the right time to go spend on it, the odds are you're not going to be able to say much about differences. That's really the important thing. Not surprisingly, people don't spend a whole lot of time trying to focus on those kinds of things. One way in which we do kind of assessments of heterogeneity is sort of jackknifing, right? These single jackknife tests, right? Where you can, and this is always really useful when you have a situation like this, right? Where you have a handful of cases, maybe you have 15, 20, 10 cases, you can run a regression, dropping each case with replacement, right? So we'll run it on the first 14, then on the first or 13 with the 15th, and then we'll run it on the first 12 with the last 2. You just run everything that way. It's a very, very easy thing to do. How long does it take in SCADA? Just go back to the previous command, change the country on, if country ID equals 1, the country, ID minus 2 that you're excluding, right? That's not equal to 1, not equal to 2. You just run it and you're assessing the basic, the robustness, right, of the structure that you're finding. That's simple. If you really want to be encompassing, right, in your assessment for heterogeneity, you can use generalized tests, right, like generalized models, that like PDL models, right? So that you're allowing there to be different structures in different countries. Okay. Here's a structure in Germany, it looks a little different. Lag, what in Germany is an X, and in Holland it's XT minus 1 that matters, right? Fine. So you don't have to settle by something. That's actually not too hard to sort out, right? Just basically taking the same ADL, you're running on all 15 countries, and you're running it on subsets of 14 to see whether or not the case selection really matters, individual cases matter. And this is really important, right? You know about this. Okay, so what about coefficients? So that's one general approach, one simple approach that's always recommended, and it's probably something that, the thing that's frustrating, I find, is that a lot of people know about this and they don't bother to do it. And so people will spend hundreds of hours running all these regressions, and then they'll get to this model, and all they have to do is take the time to do these little basic jackknives to make sure it's robust, and they don't do it. And then 3 months later, the piece is under review, comes back, or gets accepted, worse yet, and I say, oh gosh, I better go do these jackknife tests. You go do them, and it doesn't work out. You find that the results vary a lot, depending on what sort of case they're included. That's really not a good feeling. And it's not a good feeling in a whole variety of ways. Now, what are you going to do? Now you got to make a choice. It's not an easy choice to make, right? Maybe you'll make the choice you might regret, right? Just go run with it anyway. Maybe you'll try to figure it out, but it's a lot harder. It's a lot easier to figure it out when you're in the midst of your data analysis, right? You haven't put it aside, and it's 3 months later, and you can't even remember the coding you used and the sequence you did things. And so, you may think that that's not going to happen to you, but it will. If it hasn't already, some are shaking your heads, yeah, you know, you've been there. It'll get worse. You're going to get busier, right? You're going to have less time for this kind of stuff. Finding 10 hours to run data, do data analysis in a week is a luxury. Susan, how about it? I mean, there are months go by I don't touch a number, right? Months. Just don't have time, right? You're writing, and it's the same teaching and administering and doing all kinds of other things. So just make it as a habit. Just make it a habit. It's like brushing your teeth, right? Brush your teeth, you do the jackknives. Habits are good. Laugh. You just have to have good habits. You have to develop good habits for doing research. It's just like good hygiene. Or you can wing it and see what happens. It's your life. Lives. Right? Your lives. Okay, one approach we could take is something called, and this is something you saw a lot of, right, earlier. We may be interested in trying to explicitly model the differences in coefficients. And this is also something that's become increasingly acceptable, right? Not only do we need to go, not only are we allowed to assess heterogeneity in unit effects, right? We're also now allowed to assess heterogeneity in the coefficients themselves. And these are called random coefficients. Okay, and basically what we're doing in this is saying that the data, right, I is a function of some unit variable C, right? The unit C. Now one could always do this, and
there's the end of the sentence.
where did this go?
See, we're missing what I read through this.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. Yeah, substituting variables for country names is always preferred, right? So instead of just saying, we're just going to say, in Germany it's 0.72. In the Netherlands it's 0.65. In the UK it's 0.2. It'd be nice to be able to substitute variable names for that. It becomes highly theoretical, and it also becomes subject to certain aspects of inefficiency, right? For more on this stuff, I've given you some readings by Beck, and you go back to look at. There's an explicitly Bayesian approach to multi-level, right, time series cross-section, it's right here. This is also included in the list of readings I gave. I didn't expect you to do all those readings. If you notice, I tiered them, sort of pre-recommended, sort of recommended. and this was in the additional reading section for a reason. This is a pretty interesting piece. They have pretty much everything randomized, right? So you've got intercepts you're estimating, year effects you're estimating, coefficients. You can do pretty much anything, right? In that paper. I don't know if I need you to take a look at that paper. Okay, it's pretty. I think it's pretty ambitious. I think it's when N and T are pretty large and we have really good priors, this is perhaps a useful approach to take, right? But if you don't have really big N and T, and I think my bigger concern, I think Marco shares a similar concern. If we don't have good priors, we just need to proceed a little cautiously here.
Also, the bigger your N and the bigger your T, the longer it takes to do a Bayesian analysis. I mean, this is the kind of thing where you could set the computer running on a Friday night and it still wouldn't be finished on Monday night.
Yeah, this is there's some ways to doing this. There's some ways that are fairly straightforward that aren't too bad. When you do the XT mix procedures, right? They're not too bad.
That's
Right.
basic.
Right. Good point. But XT mix is a solution that's that's short of this and is not allowing you maybe to randomly estimate things as much as you might like if you wanted to allow for full heterogeneity. But so what, right? Most times you're not interested in full heterogeneity. Okay, so XT mix. We're going to take a look at it. We're not going to actually do anything with that because I don't have any multi-level data for you today. Plus, it takes a long time. I mean, working with XT mixes, that's a session that would probably be a good 3-hour session on its own. And so that's something, it's sort of traded off because the time series stuff I think is really important for you to get.
But you can do time series with XT mixed. I mean, you presumably met XT mixed in the context of
Marco did some.
hierarchical modeling. If you have time as the lowest level of analysis, XT mixed is producing random effects. Random effects are channel corrected, so you can inject all of this time series stuff at the bottom level of a multi-level model. And as far as I know, nobody has done this for a substantive research question. But there's absolutely no reason why nobody has done this. You could do it tomorrow.
Well, the only problem with it is it's not clear to me that you could have an autoregressive process with the Ys, right? So you can have them clustered, but you can't have them the dependency between them.
Well, but not if it's individual level data. But I'm not talking about individual level data as such. Not necessarily. We can come back to individual level.
Well, yeah, that's what we will.
I'm just talking about time series of the same kind as we've got here, where you have time within something within countries, or within countries within countries. It could be time within political parties within countries, for example, or time within countries within continents, or something.
You can have individuals over time within countries, right? Which is
Well, we'll come back to that. That's
I
different
know.
because now you don't have the same units at the lowest level.
Yeah, that's a I mean, it's harder. It's harder. Well, what only problem with some of this is getting the building in the dependence neatly. I mean, you can get the clustering, or you can cluster it any way, right? You can cluster by unit, you can cluster by time, you can cluster things, right? But to get them dependent, right, is a little bit trickier because then, that's. And what's most important for me is you're getting plenty of this clustering stuff. You all know about clustering, right? But you typically aren't getting a lot on time series. I think that was the more important trade-off. Okay. Well, speaking of individual level variables, this is not individual level data. This is not the title of the section. It's called dichotomous dependent variables, and I kind of hinted to you earlier, or said earlier, that we would be spending a whole lot of time on individual level data. But I'll show you the routines you would use, which are really straight. Those are really relatively straightforward to use. You have that would be applicable to both, right? Whether or not you have dichotomous dependent variables that are not individual level, or dichotomous dependent variables that just that you don't have much in the way of individual level data, right? That take the form of time series cross section, and so you can just, that's just not something you typically do. The most common uses have been in international relations, as I said before, and this is kind of frustrating because there's very few things as far, there's political theory, right, as it's oftentimes practiced in international relations, and those things are oftentimes about as far as you get from people in an ELECDEM group, right, working on individual level preferences and vote choice, right, and it's just not a lot of communication going on typically. Between these two are not reading the same stuff. You may not even be familiar with the fact that they're doing a bunch of time series cross-sectional stuff with binary dependent variables, and they call it was known in political science when they talk about it, they refer to it as binary, right? Not individual level, right? The way we would normally think about it. We would write, when we're writing this stuff, we write up individual level analysis. That's not what we're talking about here. It's not that common with electoral public opinion data.
Their binary is going to war or not going to war. That kind of thing.
Which has its own problems. They tend to, because they rely on dyads. Dyads have this really interesting kind of spatial they go on. I mean, so if you're in a highly congested area, you got a whole lot of dyads. So, and so peace is higher typically in highly congested areas. Even though the propensity to go to war tends to be higher, it seems like there's more war going on in highly congested areas. It's kind of interesting. So, it's just proportionally less. So dyad's a bad, sorry, what? It's interesting though. I've got to write a piece on that. Okay. Okay. What to say about this? This is what I'm going to give you. Again, I planned for a light session. It's going to be a light session, but I want to give you some stuff here. Buyer beware. In the analysis of binary time series cross-section data this is at its early stages, very early stages. We don't have a huge amount of statistical knowledge on this. Okay, that's the first thing. It's not well developed. It's not well assessed, right? So things like asymptotics. What we have so far mostly applies to binary dependent variables and does not generalize to more complicated dependent variables, okay, of the kind you were exposed to yesterday, right? The norm in this area is almost universal. Ignore time series and just do loaded or primitive. And the problem is time serial dependence remains a problem, right? Whether you address it or not. But if you ignore it, it remains a problem. Okay, estimates are consistent but not efficient. Okay, so a lot of people use this Huber robust standard errors. This is treating errors again as a nuisance. I just get rid of them, and so we can go do what we want to do in the first place, which is just estimate the effect of our X and our Y's. One of the reasons why, and I've already talked about this a little bit too, is one of the things is we don't have a simple residual, right? Which is basically your observed minus your predicted. That's a simple residual, right? We have observed minus predicted. What we have here is, right, is something imputed, right? Right? So you're trying to look at dynamics, right? And you're looking at errors which are not from your ones and your zeros, right? But they're errors from your predicted values. So dynamics. That's really, really tricky. You have unit effects you can estimate. It's just the same. It's pretty much the same as for continuous or interval level dependent variables. But again, if t is large, not if t is small. Still progress is being made. The way we want to estimate these kinds of things is typically with xt probit or xt logit. If you have decent size n's, there's not a lot of difference between these two. And these are available. If you need help with these or any or other variety of commands and Stata that would help you with this is help xt. I just want to show you a little bit of detail. I don't think all of you have a computer.
with the XT logic is not, it doesn't really do the same thing as the XT way. It does just the traditional regression.
Yeah, we're not going to get into too much of we could, if you want to. XT, there's all kinds of XT options here. All kinds of XT options here. You'll see the XT, it's XT mixed. There's the XT Logic Pro. There's all kinds of XT options. Really, really good. They've expanded a lot over the years. It's really big. XTP, PLS, panel data models. None of these we've already looked at. XT.
So, on binary dependent variables, I mean, there's this whole class of event history models that are usable for these data. Why would you necessarily want to run a logic on that? I mean, there's just like an army of distributions and you can choose from using event history models.
Yeah, event history is a slightly different approach, right, to things. You're not asking the same questions, are you, when you're looking at the effect of X on Y in event history?
Well,
If you're interested in cabinet, government duration or something, right? Isn't that that's a really nice event history application, right?
depends how you define your ones and zeros, I guess. There's some models that accommodate ones and zeros being permanent, entering a permanent state, and some other ones that you can actually go back and forth. You still get close to there, don't you?
You can. Event history models are, they're related, but they're different. Right?
I think you need to know that there is such a thing. It would be really good to go to a summer school and learn about it. You will learn a lot of things that are overlapped with what we learn when we do conventional data analysis. But, it's like looking at the same world through the other end of a telescope.
That's precisely.
Or it's just a different way of doing things. And for certain kinds of research problems, it's hugely preferable. For other kinds, it's just a matter of translation, and you could be using one or the other. It's something that I have never taken the time to become more than passingly familiar with. But you do want to keep asking yourself, for every research question that you have, is this a research question for which there is a better methodology than the one in which I have been trained and that I would normally use? And all of a sudden you may find yourself having to learn event history analysis because that's the methodology you need for a particular research problem that has a particular kind of data. This is especially true when the data are, as we say, sparse. So if you have events that happen occasionally over long periods of time, you're in an event history world. You're not in the kind of world that we've been talking about this week, or indeed in any other ELECDEM work.
Yeah, see, this is something from my time series class I teach. This is toward the end of the course we have a little bit on duration modeling, which is event history, basically. Here you're interested in answering different questions, right? That's one thing. It's almost, it's not used. It can be sort of morphed, I think, into using it to address the kinds of questions we're talking about, but I don't see it ever done that way. So that's a hunch, and I haven't actually, since I haven't seen it and I haven't gone through it, I could see how I think you would do it, but I don't know whether you can. One of the reasons, one of the problems with it is you can't, it's a little tricky doing time series is a very different kind of time series approach, right? It's not straightforward download. And part of it, there's, yes, the censoring is part, it's a real big problem, and there's selection bias. There's a whole bunch of things here that we could talk about. In fact, what I could do is I could send, the solution is the model duration. This is what the people who do this stuff recommend, right? This is the Box Steffenmeyer and Brad Jones stuff. So what I'm going to do, what I could do is, if you'd like, how about I send, should I just maybe attach this to our slides for today so you have a little something on it? And it's a couple pages, it's not much, but it will address things that I would happily talk about had I just given a few minutes spot and not been teaching for 11 hours. I'm just afraid I'm going to say the wrong thing. Is that okay? I'm happy to talk about it though. If I could have 5 minutes, a little cup of coffee to think and just review my notes and think about it, I'd be happy to chat. I'll remember to do that when I get done. Is there anything else? These are just some things I just wanted you to be familiar with. I mean, I actually thought about talking about event history, but then I thought it just is. My sense is that you would rather I talk about panel. Most of you would rather I talk about panel than talk about event history. That was my hunch. And so I spent a little more time on that. That you would rather I talk a little bit about dichotomous variables. In a sort of a regression viewpoint, and maybe a little bit about hierarchical models. I mean, they could be fitted really pretty directly. Anyway, let's move on. Let's do a little more hands-on to wrap things up. It's always useful to do this. And so here we go. We're going to go kind of approach, like I said before, we're going to approach the things we were looking at earlier today. We're going to come at it from a slightly different perspective. Remember, this is the stuff we're working. This is the basic structure we're working with XT, right? Or at least we were. And as a multi-level, you use XT mix. Okay. A little bit of what we've done. Last time we tried things like XTP CSE, XT reg AR, autoregressive reg, right? XT unit root, we did the diagnosis. There's XT serial correlation. That's useful. I should have done that last time. I didn't. And there are other commands. You've already seen some of them from help XT. Well, what I wanted to spend now is some time just approaching things from the OLS point of view. Instead of jumping in right into the XT reg approach, right, let's just go to the time series cross-sectional modeling of our data. Let's take the same data set and let's approach it from the point of view of just OLS. Why can't we just do OLS? Right? We know why in theory, but is it a problem in practice? It might not be a problem in practice, right? Let's go see. You haven't done this yet, right? This is our theoretical model, right? We think that preferences in different countries, in different points in time, are a function of relative preferences, are a function of absolute preferences. So these are relative preferences, these are absolute preferences, and this is policy. So right, it should be this equals this minus this with some kind of parameter related to them, right? Because they're not on the same metric. If they're on the same metric, it would just be very easy. They're not good. Okay, so let's just do this. See what we got. Okay, Mark, what do you think? Not terrible, right? Positive effect. I haven't done this at all, so we're just going to see how things go. Okay, so here we have preferences. Relative preferences are a positive function of absolute preferences, at least our measure of absolute preferences. Big t-score, lots going on there. Policy has a negative and significant coefficient, r-squared of 0.43. Not too shabby, right? Not too upsetting.
Note that we still have our 308 cases. You know, we don't have just 27. We've got 27 times the number of countries. It's still there, we're just ignoring it. We're not using an XT program. Regression doesn't know anything about our cross-section time series. It's just treating this as data, you know, and it's estimating it. It comes very close to doing the same thing as if we were doing a random effects model, but not exactly, as we may see.
Yeah, it turns out it's not too bad. This is not going to be too far from where the truth ends up being, right? It's really interesting. You get a positive effect, you get a negative effect.
If you remember the coefficients we had earlier, they were pretty much exactly the same.
So, but do we just stop here? Okay, it looks good. Let's publish it.
We did, isn't it?
What? No, it's not. That's right. We do one thing and then we just tell you to do something else. You gonna be okay, Mark, for the last half an hour right here? We have okay, so what do we want to do with this now? What do we want to do? Just end there? And you're professional now. You've had hours and hours of training in time series data. Have a look at the residuals. So what do? Oh, remember when we were working with time series cross-sectional with the XT stuff, we couldn't just predict, right? And, the residuals. But here we are, we're in reg land, right? So all we have to do is just type predict, right? This is nice. This is an area apparently where people look at the residuals, right? So we predict resid. Unless it's already there, we'll find out. It's there. Okay, so resid F, residuals. And so what do we want to do with these residuals now?
So we can make the function from the program.
Oh. Notice there's multiple panels. Problem, right?
Yeah.
Problem. So what do we have to do?
Well, we have to get rid of the multiple panels, let's do what you said.
Well, it's not gonna, I don't know if it's going to replace it or it's going to wonder what's.
Then it's gonna tell you have a repeating time period. So it's really hard to undo. Data is too clever.
Yeah.
If we never told it that we had time series, we could do this.
Can I drop the XT? I mean, the XT set.
I think if you just do XT set with nothing, that might undo the XT.
No, that just displays it.
No, it just.
XT set, yeah.
How about XT set off? XT set no.
Well,
How about help XT set?
how about we just make our own program? Okay, so what do we do?
Take away the G for start.
Oh.
Chord. Can't? Oh.
I don't know if it's a
L
little
won't work. Well, yes, L will work, because it's still set as an XT. It's still XT.
Yeah, we did it earlier, right?
Right, it's still XT set, so it will do it. It will use the, it knows what to do with Ls and Ds.
I better shut down my email. I'm getting ridiculous. So, I owe you something. You'll get it later on. Do a lag by as well. Why not? What's going on?
Well, it's approximately what we saw before. Except the correlations are high.
What's it tell us? We're almost done. The sooner we get done. I'm on slide 20, I think, or 26.
What's that going to be?
Going to be integrated? Sure. Go back here. Yeah. Not decaying geometrically, right? I mean, we can't say it's going to be, can't say that it's, it's not off by a couple hundredths points. Remember the last time we looked at it, it could have been this, could have been that. This doesn't look off here, right? I mean, you've got 0.75, you multiply 0.75 times 0.75 times 0.75 times 0.75 times 0.75, and that's what we should have in that last row. And that should be a lot less than 0.57. In fact, the second row should probably be 0.57. So this is not decaying geometry. So what do we do? Do we get drunk? No, we don't try to solve it, right? We don't try to figure out what's going on, right? Well, how do we remember looking at our variable in the first place? I mean, what do we? These are the residuals. Like we have got something weird going on in our residuals, right? This does not look like something stationary floating around there, right? Or something non-stationary floating around there. So what does that mean? How do we deal with that? What did we think of our variable when we first looked at it, right? That look very stationary.
coefficient. Or I suppose we can't tell what the coefficient is. The correlation.
Doesn't look very stationary either. So from the get-go, we don't think this is a very stationary variable. So what about these other variables we have? We didn't bother to go look at whether or not it was stationary, right? Do we do much trying to diagnose it? What about our other variables? Are they stationary? Well, maybe this variable is integrated. Or maybe it has an integrated component. Right? Maybe we have, should we look at our other variables as well? We should look at I'm them. How's that look? Well, if I, U, and I is, we think that might be integrated. This would probably be even more certain, right? This integrated, or at least this leading in that direction has something like that. It's a good policy. I don't have to keep doing this. We just keep stopping. So, you know, are we heading in the right direction? You know, now that we're doing diagnostics on variables that we know about, are we heading in the right direction? Starting off with OLS. I mean, if you knew, you know, if you did these diagnostic tests, would you even really consider doing this? Well, the typical approach would be right to keep, I mean, most people wouldn't know about this, right? They don't really look at that. They don't have an XT form, right? So what do? They typically don't do something like this. Well, let's include our lag dependent variable, right? And what we'll do is we'll also add these country dummies in here, right? So this is basically a lag dependent variable. All right, country dummies. Let's go do that. And get something like this, right? What do we find now? Not a whole lot of change. Remember we've seen this before? Like the IMAP coefficient drops, the policy coefficient stays about the same. IU and I comes in, country dummies, you know, some of them work, some of them don't, but you know, we capture something now. R squared goes up, right? You're counting, you know, your 20 variants, boy, you get those country dummies get you a lot of purchase, right? You're not a 0.7, so. Right? You can go ahead and look at residuals again, right? Remember we're wow. How do they look? Not bad. It's pretty good, yeah.
White noise. That's what we're looking
It doesn't look like there's much going on there. Well, maybe you could say something going on like 2, like 3, but it's not really that. I mean, it's not like we were finding before, right? They're not even 0.2. Remember? Close to them. Place what coefficient is close to 0.2. We have a couple over here close to 0.3. And, you know, most of you, I don't think are going to get into something like lag 2, lag 4, and lag 3, lag 5 type process, right? And recall that that is the same as running this regression. What we just did is model fixed effects, right? Here. Right? It's the same thing as running X2 reg, same independent variables, same independent variables, with fixed effect. Coefficients are precisely the same. Policy
They're the same.
minus 0.00127 is the coefficient on policy. The t is 2.74 minus. What do we find here? Minus 0.00127 coefficient minus 2.74. Right? So we've done by hand here using reg, right, OLS, what xt reg is doing, right, it's just doing itself. Right? You can tell it's doing the same thing. So what we did is we dummied up the countries. What does xt reg do? Does it dummy up? It means very good. That's good. Good memory. The interesting thing about it, look what it does. You don't lose any degrees of freedom when you do it, though, do you? Huh? You should lose more than one, right?
Well, the meaning
But went from 308 to 290.
Because we included the lag number. Okay, so that's where, you know, it's not too bad, right? So we know what the autocorrels, we don't know what the ACF of the residuals is going to be because we just did it here with the residuals from the regression output, which is precisely the same, right? It's going to be precisely the same. So we could add in year dummies, right? If you want. This is just another check, okay? Let's be really hard on ourselves, right? Let's be really hard. Let's push ourselves even further, and let's put in these controls for years, right? Let's see if that makes any difference. Well, God, don't want to do that, right? It could be really complicated. Sorry. What do we find? IM still positive, drops a little bit in size and significance. Policy effect is up, it actually increases, becomes more reliable. The lag dependent variables still are very highly reliable dynamic processes. You know, we could also take a different approach, right? We could say, well, you know, why have we spent all this time working with ADL and ECM models, right? It's because they're useful. You can just incorporate them right into time series cross-sectional half-lives, right? Here you go. Here's an auto-regressive distributed lag model, right? This is written, sorry. So here you have y, sub I sub t is written as a function of y sub I sub t minus 1, x sub I sub t, and x sub I sub t minus 1, right? Okay, now how would we do that? How does it differ to what we just did? Well, you know, we have this model here, right? Preferences on relative preferences on absolute preferences on policy with lag kind of variable, right? And then these dummies. Here, we're going to keep the dummies, we're going to keep the dependent variable, we're going to keep the lag dependent variable, we're going to keep IM, right? We're going to add a lag IM, right? We're going to keep the current current value of the policy, we're going to add a lag policy, right? And it's going to tell us whether our functional form assumptions that we've been making, why assume them, right, are correct. Sorry. They don't, you got to put CID in there.
not very clear.
What's that?
Not clear when.
No. And so here you are. What do we find? Well, the lag dependent variable coefficient is about the same, right? The traffic key between about 0.62 and 0.72. Very reliable dynamic effect there. Current value of IM, positive and significant. Lag value, negative and significant. What does that tell you? I know I'm asking too much of you probably, but we talked about this a little bit. And I'm going to just do a little math on the board because this is reiterating something we did, not fresh. If you have something like this, so you have this. What does that tell you? The effect of X is really, right? It has a difference effect, right? It's a sharp effect once you yeah, it's important. And so it's B naught delta x of t, right? Which is what a lot of people assume, right? Differences matter. Here it's kind of coming out of the data, but it's not quite that because it's not, these are not equal and opposite sign. This one's a little bigger. So it's saying that differences matter more, right? The x of t matters a little bit more than the xt minus 1. We'll say well, the xt minus 1 is negative. Well, it's not really because remember, what it is here is that is 0.40, say, times xt minus 1 minus 0.26 xt minus 2. I'm sorry, xt minus 1. So what is this? This is 0.4 times, you can decompose this into the difference, right? xt, right? What else? Plus xt minus 1, right? Minus 0.26 xt minus 1. So you can rewrite this as 0.4 difference xt plus 0.4 xt minus 1 minus 0.26 xt minus 1, which is plus 0.14 xt minus 1. Right? So it's telling you that the difference effect is larger than the lag. This is the kind of thing you might expect if you have some kind of equilibrium process going on, right? The effect of policy, interestingly, doesn't have such a, okay, the current, right, and such a difference between the current changes and the lag levels, right? Here, the lag level is non-significant, right? Just the current, which means that current changes and lag levels are the same, right? Have the same effect. It's ironic why you, well, how can it have the same effect? Well, this exists, this coefficient here, you can decompose, right, into current changes, right? Point, in this case, minus 0.05 times policy, right? At t, which means that 0.005 difference in policy at t plus 0.005 policy at t minus 1. Right? This is precisely equal to that, right? What is today's value of policy? Yesterday's plus the change, right? And the effect of policy on preferences is 0.05 times the change, 0.05 times yesterday. Right? Once you get used to doing this, it's not that hard. It's just not, you're not, most of you are not used to thinking, you're mostly used to doing individual level stuff process, you're not used to thinking about it. It's not that hard. It's just a matter of getting used to it. What I tried to do with you the last couple of days is get you a little bit comfortable with it, a little more comfortable with it, so you're going to be able to empowered to do it on your own. Because that's what I want you to do. Just go, it's not hard. What I'm doing here is really not that hard. It just takes some practice. And anybody who tells you that mystery stuff is just, you know, it's wrong. This is kind of an interesting model, right? Now you're controlled for everything, with including the kitchen sink. You know, it looks pretty good, right? Suggests, though, you know, that our assumptions about earlier models might not be quite right, right? That the effects are slightly different for policy and I know. Any questions on this so far? Keep going, look at the residuals. You could also do an error correction model, right? Here's an error correction model. This is kind of the two, remember the two-step approach? Right, because you have this regression first, and then you then you take the residuals from y, regress on x, and then you lag with lag residuals, and then you put them in here in this equation. You know, as I suggest to you before, it's oftentimes, I mean, it's mathematically equivalent, you know, to estimating these separately, right? This effect and this effect. And for this analysis, we could do it both ways. If you want me to do it both ways, I'd have to do that. But I think for this analysis, it's just useful to do it the one way. Do right now. So that, all that involves, by the way, let me just show you. All we're going to do is we're just going to take these, this equation, and change all the current independent variables and make them difference, right? Because what do you have here? Difference in x. You have lag y. We already have that, right? Here's what, sorry. So we have the difference in a dependent variable. Lag y. There it is. Difference in our x variable. Okay. Lagged x. difference in our x variable, and then that'll add x, right? So we basically added two different things, right? So we'll do that. So difference dependent variable, easy, capital D. Difference independent variable, difference independent variable. And voila. If the effects of the difference and the lag are the same, right? So instead of here, what did we do? Here we infer to the effect of the differences and the lag, right, by adding up the coefficients. Here we're just estimating them, right? And just as we found when we just did it, the effect of the current difference in policy and the lag difference in policy are virtually the same, right? And the difference in the difference effect of IMF, right? Underlying preferred levels of policy and the lags are slightly different. Right? Current differences are a little bit bigger effect than lag levels. Notice that lag IU&I has a lag coefficient here, right? That coefficient looks almost identical to the coefficient that we got back earlier when we did XT reg AR. If you recall, why the wacky coefficient? I think that was minus 0.32. This is minus 0.33. And this is the explanation for why. Basically, what we've done here is captured error correction model, right? Captured error correction framework. So all we're doing with that is just writing it in a different way, getting it in a different way. So everything you learn basically in time series can be applied here. You just have to do it by hand. They don't have XT ADL, they don't have XT ECM, they don't have XT co-integration, right? This is all done in red, right?
And could equally be done next year. I should say this and that.
That's it. Right. But I actually find it kind of useful when you're starting out. I mean, if you went and got residuals of this regression and you find that you need to go do some further corrections, like you could do XT-TCSE, right? Because you're worried about panel corrections, run it using XT-TCSE and it'll take care of any panel heterogeneity, any other contemporaneous correlation. But I'm not going to imagine you're going to have any contemporaneous correlation left because you've dummied up all the years, right? There's not much left you're going to have to worry about. Okay, in this example, T, ironically, I think you might find T's pretty large. We have 27 time serial observations. That's not bad. That's not great. That's not what most economists are comfortable with. But Susan's talking to me about her series of 3, right? And Zolt's going to be talking to me about a series of 2, right? Here's to do 50% better, Susan. You can actually calculate a bias coefficient, right? A bias factor for yours. Like Marcus said before, when you get to 10, 12, 15, you're doing okay. When you get to 25, 30, you're doing really well. When you're dealing with the kinds, when you're heading somewhere between where I am and where certainly the result is you're in the land of random effects. I mean, where Susan is, you're in random effects. Result is you're not even quite there yet, right? So it's not easy to do. The most important thing you can do, though, especially when you can't estimate the fixed effects, I mean, the most important thing you do, what you're trying to do is just find a way to squeeze the data and figure out what's going on. Right? Just what's going on here, what's going on. And all I try to do here is give you some things to think about when you're doing that, different kinds of things to watch out for, and some commands to maybe go do it. Pointing you to some other things that would take a lot longer to walk you through, like some of the hierarchical level stuff, that would take some time. Event history would take some time as well. So I'm happy to talk a little bit about that. Any final questions? Is it parting shots? Okay.
Can I?
Yes, Susan.
Always
You're
a final
the.
question.
You can ask whatever you want.
No,
I'd like to thank you for being so generous with your time and for giving such a useful talk for us. So could you join me in thanking and usually we have two sorts of questions, or I have two sorts of questions that I like to ask of
Nice questions.
they're going to really put you on the spot. The first one, you have been, and you currently are serving as an editor, and have served as an editor of some good journals and some big journals. And I know this group is particularly focused on, doing the analysis, but also making sure that that research is disseminated. And in terms of looking at either pooled cross-sectional data or looking at time series data, and when you're looking as an editor or as a reviewer at a piece, what are some things that you clearly point out to you that there's something wrong here? And also, how do you communicate that, and then how do you expect the researcher or the author of the piece to deal with those sorts of comments that you might have? That's sort of a roundabout way of asking you to talk about the publishing process.
Right.
As both an editor, a reviewer, and a author.
Yeah, well, I think actually very similar. Being an editor, reviewer, and author is actually really quite similar. And the one thing that's really neat about being an editor is, as an author, you feel like you get a bunch of unfair reviews, but as an editor, it doesn't seem that way. It doesn't seem, so which is probably a bad sign. It's a bad sign somehow, right? I don't know quite. Given that I'm a lot more relaxed as I've gotten older, I think that means that I just don't, as an editor, I just don't know enough about all the areas to tell, right? What bad reviews are, right? And that's a little worrisome. But thankfully, hopefully the reviewers do. And I'm a big believer in working with another person who's a specialist, but a different kind of specialist, complementary, and maybe a little bit of overlap. But I'm a really big believer in working in areas, only editing in areas in which you know what you're doing for the most part, because I couldn't imagine doing a general journal where you have to just have such serious principal agent topics. Trust people you don't even know, never even heard of, right? I just don't. With the debates, I don't understand. In terms of the kind of general policy, in terms of what kinds of things, I like when you're coming to methodological stuff. If there's two things. One is if you seem like you're just cookbooking it, and you believe you're not showing kind of a nuanced appreciation for things. I think that worries me. Like if you haven't thought of things that I can think of, because when I'm an editor, I'm not really reading it like a reviewer, right? I'm not writing my review. I'm reading it to get reviewers and then assessing what reviewers have to say and read the piece maybe to judge what they're saying. When I'm reviewing a piece, I'm reading it kind of harshly, right? With a critical eye. If they're not thinking about stuff that I'm thinking of, that's bad. And it doesn't, because I'm not putting my whole life's energy into it. It's not like one of my graduate students, where I've spent lots of hours working with them. And so if I could spend a few hours and see stuff that they couldn't anticipate, it's probably a bad sign. If you have to push them to do things, there's certain things in here. Why would they do the basic stuff? Why not? If they're not doing it, and if they have to be pushed to do it and they fight, then I get really red flags go on. And so I just really, I don't mind people fighting me at all. I don't mind being told I'm wrong or people disagree with me. That's happened a lot, And been in the business a lot. It's a tough business, right? It's pretty tough, pretty harsh. Bottom in. But I also, I'm not a fool, right? So.
What's the best way to prevent that then?
Anticipate.
Take your
time.
And take your time.
Yeah, take your time is the most important. I think what you have a tend to do. We talked about this. Deanna, she's not doing more. Deanna and I were talking at lunch, and she was. One of the things I was suggesting to her is just the tendency we all have is to rush off. Get things in print, and when you're in that point, especially if you just work out, I've got to get done. I just want to send this off. That's not good. You need to be really, really ready. people who have been really, how many good, you find these young people, they come out, they have one publication, they get the job. You have a Stanford PhD with the one publication. The Columbia person with the one publication gets the job. And they spend 7 or 8 years there, get really good training, work on a whole bunch of different kinds of projects, right? And you spend 3 or 4 years taking a piece and polishing, and getting offensive in the footnotes, offensive in the text, defensive in the notes, citing everybody, right, that needs to be cited, that's relevant to it, and won't be hostile to it. That's really important. You got to be careful on your frame. Really, really got to be careful on your frame. How you frame a paper will send it to the right reviewers, to the wrong reviewers. Doesn't mean you control it completely, but I remember when I came out, I was doing work at the budget process, and I was formal. I was getting sent to formal people, I was being sent to quantitative people, and I was being sent to sort of congressional people. I was killed. I was impossible. I mean, there is no intersection in that sense. At least there wasn't 20 years ago. There was no intersection. There was no way to win. So I had to find, okay, this is where I want to be in that group. In fact, I didn't want to be reviewed by any of those people. Doing dynamic stuff, representation stuff. I wanted people like Stimson to look at it. You never got it. So that's important too. Just try to be, anticipate and take your time, polish things and perfect things and have people read it. And make sure you have people reading it that actually care. I mean, people who are going to be hard. If people are reading your stuff and saying, yeah, it looks good, send it off. Nothing looks good, send it off. Right? Not off the get-go. I mean, let's be suspicious. I had a lot
We
of
have a friend who does that.
Yeah, I had a lot of that. I was just really serious in this guy. But where the Iowa and my new job at Houston. So a car wreck, a divorce, and some really serious bad advice from my advisors at Iowa and Houston. I was like 3 years behind the curve. That's not good when you're up for tenure after 5 years. I had a good 2 or 3 years after that. So probably my most important work during that period hit, like thermostat type stuff and some of the stuff that I like. That was stuff that was, I remember APSR had one piece for 14 months, and then they had another piece. They said after 13 months, well, we're not sure about this piece, but here you have this other piece we'd like to take a look at. 13 months later, they rejected that one too. That was great fun. I almost sent them a dozen roses after 12 months, and they said it wouldn't last. Decided against it. I remember talking to the editor who I remained nameless after the second time, like, hey, you pull one of my pieces, you ask for another piece, after 13 months, and then you have it go, to 14 months to finally get back to me, then you let it go, then you go, the other piece go 13 months and you reject it, based on positive reviews. Can you explain this to me? You're tight for space. Okay, so, that's another thing is, you got degrees of freedom we were talking about earlier. I mean, if you don't polish things up, you're going to reduce your chances of getting published in your first piece, in your first journal, and second journal. You might say, well, fine, there's always a third journal. Well, that's if you want to live with this piece for, a large period of your life, right? And most of you probably don't. And you're going to get out into other stuff, and it's going to get easier to proliferate stuff, and you're going to network with people. My gosh, look at this room. I mean, you've got co-authorship opportunities that I couldn't even contemplate. Right? I can't even contemplate now. Just sitting in this room. And you're going to want to get out of that stuff and move. And it's going to be really efficient. These are good people, they're good, smart people, well-trained, well-networked, well-connected. And you're going to move. You don't want to be spending 8 years trying to publish this piece, right? And you're going to have the next piece. You're going to be doing the same thing with that. You're going to have like 15 pieces under review. You'll never write again. When you have 15 pieces under review, all you do is revise and resubmit and revise and resubmit and reach page groups, right? Copy edits, right? Just think, when you have 5 pieces coming up, you spend much of your life copy editing and reading page groups. And making sure you did the analysis right, and make sure the data is archivable, right? Because somebody's going to ask for it. What do you mean you can't give them your data? Right? Editor might ask you for it, and they're going to want to be able to work with it. Oh gosh, it's going to take me a work week to get ready. How did I construct that data set? Just be methodical. Good habits. Some of you laughed when I said that. If you don't get into good habits now, you're going to regret it later. It's up to you. It's a little like, brushing your teeth, exercise, eating right.
You have dental problems?
No, I don't know. I just no, because I brush my teeth. I'm hoping to delay the onset of cancer as well by doing some exercise. Anything? No gum disease.
Could you talk a bit? You talked a bit about after the PhD, but now we're sort of in the third year of this project, and the researchers are now getting to the point where they're, a number of them are finishing up
Yeah.
on, or expect to finish their PhDs quite soon. Can you talk about that transition from the PhD to the first job, or is it the postdoc? How soon do you start worrying? Are you guys worried now? How many of you are worried? You're
Don't
thinking
seem
about-
worried.
It's because I'm optimistic.
We'll spend a bit of time talking about research grant opportunities tomorrow, but there is that. It is a big, or is it a big transition? Do you just continue doing the same things? Do you think a little differently?
Well, you pretty much know. I mean, first off, postdocs were not even contemplated in my time, and they're not contemplated by most Americans, unless they're contemplating European postdocs. There's very few postdocs in the United States. Probably not a growth industry at this point either. I suspect it's probably not a growth industry here either, right?
It's huge.
Yeah.
It's vastly different.
Well, no, yeah, but it's probably not a growth industry. I mean, it's probably the numbers, I guess, are not going to be going up, and more like, I mean, something has to be cut. I mean, you know, and will be cut, and it's happening in the UK. Yeah, so I mean, you know, so if you're transitioning to a postdoc, I think that's pretty cushy, right? That's pretty easy. I mean, if I were you, though, and this is your best time to just really make a mark, right? The sooner you make a mark, the better. So hit the ground running. I mean, that's what but you got to hit the ground running intelligently. I mean, it's you know, quantity is important, but quality is important. I mean, what really matters. It'd be really nice if you had a piece that 10 years after you publish it, people are saying, "Wow, that was really, you know, that changed the way I think." And if you have 2 pieces, you know, you're set. So just remember that as you're going along. It's not, you know, that you have 50 pieces. I mean, you want to have a number of pieces. You don't want to be. I mean, there's some people who remain nameless who do pretty important stuff, but they do it every 10 years. That's not enough, right? Particularly early on, that should not be your trajectory. It has to be a different kind of trajectory. I mean, I think the most important thing is just to really, is when you get on a job, I mean, it's just be smart. I mean, you have to be kind of ruthless about it. You have to be a good teacher, you need to be a good citizen, you need to be a good administrator. You know, and they're going to expect that of you, particularly after you spend a whole bunch of time in grad school, ELECDEM, postdocs. I mean, you're going to be expecting publications, but they're also going to be expecting you to walk in and be a bit of a leader, right? So you've got to be ready to do that. When you hit the ground as an assistant professor in the United States, I think people don't expect as much of that. Don't expect as much of that. And you know, where I am at Temple, we do. It's part of the reason why I think we've been so successful. We're really good at attracting people. Partly because of the people we attracted to begin with, and partly because of Philadelphia, but partly also our track record. We haven't lost anyone. We're really great people. I don't know if you know that, but you just take a look at the faculty list there. We treat them fantastically. I mean, they don't have a negative thing. They get great pay raises. If they produce like I produce, they get the same raise. If they produce better than I produce, they get a better raise. Not in percentage terms, in raw cash. And they get so that's the way it should be. It's
Well, it should be, but isn't that
It's
right?
the only institution I know. I can patent the University of Pennsylvania. I was talking to some people there. They have instituted in the College of Social Sciences, but that's just not the norm. The norm is percentages. And so if you have the same year as a senior professor who makes 3 times what you make, they get 3 times the raise again, right? We have an institution where we really take care of it. The U.S. tends to be the approach, is you tend to take care of the young people, you try to grow them, and then when they get out of it, when they get tenure, then they get hammered, right? They usually get an administrative job. It's a little different in the UK. UK people get a little bit of time, and I think they get hammered a lot more, right? So when they come, particularly, I think they get saddled with a lot more when they get on the job than in the US. It's a different kind of job where I'm from, though. So when I was at the UK, I mean, the hardest thing for me was the administration. I mean, it seemed like I spent 25, 30 hours a week administrating. And in the US, I don't do that unless I take a job administrating. I get paid for that, or I get time off, or something. You know, most of my time is spent teaching. I really like teaching, and that's great fun. It's tiring a little bit, but it's great. I mean, if you don't like teaching, you know, yeah, probably. Unless you're planning on going the research route, not as academia, then I mean, you're going to do a lot of it. And I also think that the course loads are a growth industry too. I think we're likely to get larger course loads over time. Not going to shrink. It's happening in the U.S. I suspect it's going to happen here too. We got to find a way. You know, higher education is tough to defend. It's not like teaching 8-year-olds, right? There's a lot of support for taking care of 8-year-olds. There isn't a lot of support for free tuition in the UK, I've noticed it, like, right, or Germany or anywhere else. Right? Protect the higher education institution. Somebody's got to pay for that. And students don't have an infinite supply of money, so that's going to hurt. There's nothing you haven't heard. I don't have much else to say that you haven't heard.
You're all
Always
smart.
good to hear it again.
Yeah, you know what you need to do.
Publish.
Publish, but you need to work on ideas, and I think this group is good for that. I mean, I think what they are really impressed you is a real focus. I mean, work with, you know, it has to have an idea, and then good empirics, right? And that combination just makes that's what makes a difference. It's when you know, people remember, they don't, you know, sure, vector cast the talent right, the standard errors, right? But in what sense is the idea doing that, right? I mean, the stuff in my work, I think that people remember, they don't refer to, oh, what great empirical analysis we did. It's the idea. Right? The empirical analysis delivered the idea, right? Because it would, you know, if it was crappy empirical analysis, they say, well, this is garbage, right? But they don't remember the empirical analysis. They remember how you changed the way they think. That's the most important thing. That's why you got into this business. You didn't get into this business to do what the cab driver does. Nothing against the taxi driver. Taxi driver's not supposed to be able to contribute to the political science literature, though, right? But if you're saying the same things a taxi driver's saying, that's probably not good, right? So I don't think you are, so don't worry about it.
Great. Thanks, Chris. I'd also
Oh,
like
thank
to say thank you to Mark as
Yeah,
well.
thanks, Mark.
That was great, and he's come along and really moved the discussion along as well. So thanks, Mark, for attending.